Hey guys, it's Ryan here, the Hobbies Man. Once again, and today we're going to be doing another review slash discussion of a story in our Road to the Blackstone reading challenge. So today we're going to be looking at The Children of the Night, which is inside the Horror Stories of Robert E. Howard volume of the Del Rey collection. It's on page 143, right there. And this is a kind of short story. It only has about 14 pages, more or less. It goes from 143 to 157. And one of them is this very creepy, very interesting image here. And this story was published in April 1931. This is the story that introduces us to John Conrad and John Kirowan. However, it's not actually about them. And so I'm kind of disappointed about that, because that means that I don't really get to know them before the Blackstone event, right? So, you know, if I could go back in time and redo this, I would have picked a different story for them, even though this is technically the first story that they show up in. It's not really about them. It's about another character that's tied with them, right? But this is a horror story in the sense that it employs a lot of Cthulhu mythos type imagery and stuff, right? And it's pretty good. I would give this like a 4.5 out of 5. I thought it was pretty great. I really, really enjoyed it. It's very similar to other stories in the Robert E. Howard library, but yeah, so that's it for the introduction there. Let's just get into it. So it's about 6 dudes that are hanging out in a room of sorts, I guess an office of someone. I think it's John Conrad's office, and these 6 guys are John Conrad, John Kirowan, a guy called Tabarel, a guy called Kettrick, and a guy called Clement, as well as John O'Donnell. And as you can see, everyone was named John in this area of the world that Robert E. Howard was writing about. So, and we spend a lot of time talking about the racial background of these characters. They're all of Anglo-Saxon stock, although Kentrick, for whatever reason, seems slightly different to them. And they mentioned that he has slightly narrowed eyes, and that there's something slightly weird about the way he talks. And, as a modern person, I'm like, oh, well, he probably just has some slightly different ancestry than them, right? From whatever it may have been. However, because of the time period that this was written in and the way that social, things about race were back then, and the way that, scientists looked at race back then, we get this kind of like eugenic vibe that I wasn't completely comfortable with. I wasn't necessarily upset about it. I know that I'm reading something that's really old, and it's going to have outdated kind of concepts, but it's just so blatantly wrong that it's just like hard to swallow, because that's not how race works, right? Like it's not like, and it's confusing because of the ways that race in Robert E. Howard's like fake history also kind of works the way that he thinks it does, even though it doesn't. It's just really confusing. So let me see if I can kind of simplify what I'm talking about. So humanity as a species only has one race, right? The human race. Race as in different colored skin and phenotype is not actually race. Like if there was a human and a Neanderthal group of people, they would be 2 different races of humans, but they are not actually, that is not actually the case in the modern world, right? Black people are the same race as white people, that are the same race as brown people, that are the same race as, all of the other ones. The only difference is phenotype changes due to where the people have been the longest, right? Like, that's all there is. And we can call that race, but it's not really true. The only way that race as a word would actually be correct in the dictionary sense would be when we meet a different race of intelligent beings, right? Like if humans and elves existed together, those would be 2 different races, but they wouldn't necessarily be, the humans in the race wouldn't have different races of themselves, right? And so the way that Robert E. Howard writes about race in this case is that, Anglo-Saxons are a race of white-haired people that have like an origin where they all come from white-haired people, blonde-haired people with blue eyes, right? Aryans. Although he actually was right, he's actually talking about Proto-Indo-Europeans, right? But he calls them Aryans because that's what they were called back then. Although they would be Proto-Indo-European people, right? And he talks about how like Italian people, Mediterranean people are a different race in that they're brown and squat, which I think he's trying to say that they're like Cro-Magnon / Neanderthal people, although that's not true. Whatever. But it's all kind of funny, although it's also a little bit kind of like ill, right? And I don't really want to keep harping on this, so I'm going to move on from this. But basically, all of that, race stuff is in order to make it clear that when he goes back in time later on, he is looking at different groups of people that are significantly different from each other, and one of them might actually be a different race of being, right? But they are long since gone. So these guys are hanging out together. We get this explanation about their racial backgrounds, or whatever you want to call it, and they have this creepy mallet thing, or like a little ball peen hammer or whatever, and they're messing with it, and it has some weird qualities to it. It messes with the way that they swing. Maybe it has some sort of non-Newtonian fluid or something as the base, and so it like has odd characteristics when you swing it, where it doesn't follow the path that you would expect it to because the weight shifts differently, right? And all of these guys try to swing it, and they're all like upset about how it doesn't work properly. Eventually, Ketrick gets it. It's his turn to swing the hammer, and he tries to swing it slowly to find out how the weight changes, and then he swings it normally, like with a lot of strength, towards a shield on the wall, and then on the bounce back, it hits John O'Donnell on the head, and this actually sends him back in time in some way to an ancient land, which actually just ends up being the British Isles before the Roman invasion of it, I guess, like long before. And it turns out that he is a young youth of the sword people. His name is Ariaras, I think. It's just Aryan with an extra letter at the end. And he is the last survivor of his little band of warriors of 6 young men. And the reason he's the last survivor is because he was supposed to be on watch. He fell asleep. And then the children of the night, these creepy things that are human but not. Actually, they kind of sound like skinwalkers to me, or like Wendigos, that sort of like creepy, unhinged eater type thing, right? Like not actually what Native Americans think of skinwalkers to be, but like a more like modern, crazy, evil entity type interpretation of them, right? And he sees them, he wakes up in this terror, and he sees that his friends are dead. They attack him, he attacks them back, he swears revenge on these children of the night, and he goes off to hunt them. And he does this a lot, and throughout this whole time that he's telling us about his hunting, he's also telling us the history of the world, right? Which actually ends up being just the history of the way that people migrated across Eurasia and Africa and stuff. And I think that's relatively accurate to what we think of nowadays. But of course, it's still twinged with that, 1920s racism. But it's still interesting. And the Children of the Night do end up being a different race of people. They are not human. They are humanoid, right? But they have like clearly monstrous features. They have these giant, teeth and this gash of a mouth is what I think what he said. And he finally manages to, get overpowered by them. He kills so many of them, and they attack him in such droves that he ends up succumbing to the strength of these Children of the Night, and he wakes back up. And then when he sees Ketrick, he sees that this guy has some of the same vaguely Asian features that these Children of the Night had as well, and he leaps at him to attack him. Then everyone else thinks he's crazy at this point, and they try to pull him back to get him to stop doing this. And eventually he does. He leaves, and then we follow him a little bit later. He's kind of like just walking around, and he's dealing with the fact that, he swore revenge on the Children of the Night for his people, and he has a chance to finally do that. He's going to finish it off. And so he basically swears to kill anyone that resembles these things, right? And it's really interesting. I found myself pretty compelled by this story. There was issues that I didn't like with it, but it was just the right amount of creepy to keep me interested and keep me kind of like, uncomfortable reading, but also it was very fun. I really had a great time with this concept, with this idea of this guy somehow contacting an ancient version of himself, right? Entering this kind of animus of self, and going back in his genetic memory, which I'm pretty sure is kind of true, right? Like the way or the reason why people have certain phobias that are naturally induced is because of genetic memory, right? I think they prove this with animals, so with rats, I think. So it should be true for humans as well. So there is a certain truth to that kind of concept, and that he goes back in time and sees these horrible, skinwalker beast things eat his people, and he swears revenge on them. And the concept of this tribe of the sword people, and the way that they moved across, and all of the concepts that are introduced, is pretty cool. I really like that. I think it's pretty fun. It has a lot of value to it, right? Of course, we might want to strip some of the racism away for modern audiences. If someone were to use this as a basis for like anthology of films or something, or TV shows or episodes of TV, you would have to simplify some of that stuff to make it less wrong. But it is still a good concept. Like, I would like to see some sort of Robert E. Howard show anthology, right? Call it the like the Savage Sword of TV or something, whatever that's a bad name, but something like that, right? And kind of have these anthology episodes that kind of feature some of these stories. And I think the horror stories would be a lot more interesting than most of the normal ones that he has. So I like this. I thought it was great, but there are some issues with it, right? I also want to talk about the Untitled Fragment at the end of this book. It's literally the last thing in the book. It's past the miscellanea of the book, and it's the very last page before the appendix, right? So it's Untitled Fragment. It's a 1.5 page story. It never actually finishes, but it's basically the basis for the story that Jeff Shanks, the guy that does the essays at the back of the Conan comic books right now, it's the basis for his foray into comic book creating, right? He wrote a story based on this one, or more of a sequel or like a continuation to this Untitled Fragment, and it's going to be part of the John Kirowan and John Conrad kind of part of the Blackstone event. And I wanted to read it to figure out what it was about. And, well, there really isn't too much to say about it, but it's nice to know what's going on here ahead of time, right? So I want to talk about it now. So this Untitled Fragment, like I said, is only a page and a half. And what it basically deals with is more of that, Robert E. Howard fake history, alternative history that he made through a conversation between two characters. One of them is named Allison, although Jeff told me that he changed the character's name to O'Donnell, although that might cause confusion because O'Donnell is already a friend of John Conrad and John Kirowan. And so this guy should not be him, based on the fact that in the previous story, The Children of the Night, he goes kind of crazy because of his his genetic memory or whatever. So maybe it would have been better to call him a different name, although it could just be a different guy, right? So it's this guy Allison, right? And he's also talking to this other guy called Brill, and they're standing in front of this ancient tomb, and they're debating about it. They're like, is this Egyptian? Is it not? Brill thinks it is, and he can't really understand why it would not be. But the other guy, Allison / O'Donnell, is telling him, hey, this could be more ancient than Egypt, because before the Egyptians, there were many, many people as well before them, right? And he talks about some of them. He mentions the Stygians and the red-haired Nordic people, and all of this type of stuff, which is supposed to be the Vanir and the Aesir. And the Stygians are ancient black people, I think. And then he mentions the nameless cult again, which is Robert Howard's version of the Necronomicon. And they talk about Atlantis and stuff, and how there is this pre-cataclysm race that kind of did all of these things, right? And basically the idea is, yes, it's going to be more ancient than the Egyptians. I would bet my life on it. Let's see what happens. Let's see what we unearth. And I'm guessing that it's going to be something very concerning and kind of crazy, and probably related to some of what's it called? Yogg Sagoth, right? That's Robert E. Howard's, Cthulhu monster, right? It might be related to that. It might not be. I don't know, but I'm pretty excited about it. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Children of the Night and the Untitled Fragment that both feature John Conrad and John Kirowan. Let me know what you guys thought down below. I will link Jeff Shanks' YouTube channel down below. And hopefully we'll get around to having a conversation with him after after I get a chance to figure out when to do that, to talk about, his foray into comic book making. So thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and see you guys later.